Disclaimer. Music is a form of art, and art is meant to be interpreted in different ways by different people. So even if your interpretations of these songs are completely different than mine, neither of us would be incorrect. This video is meant to be an open discussion and a mutual celebration towards this amazing group of artists who's creating this music. If you have any thoughts or ideas you'd like to add to the discussion, I'd love to hear them in the comments below. With that being said, let's look at the first song, Pantyhose, from the 2014 album French Exit. This was also TV Girls' first album ever released. Boys march into war to serve and defeat. They were younger than me. I find it very intentional here describing the soldiers as boys instead of men, as in boys too young to be at war and too young to experience the tragedies it brings. Guns poke through the trees, death on a limb. They were aiming at him, and when the bullets came, he didn't duck. He wrapped her pantyhose around his neck, and he could feel the magic working, keeping him from harm. This paints the scene of a young soldier being distracted from his duties of war by his faraway love. I think his use of the pantyhose exposes a few different things about his character. First of all, it shows how naive he is. This soldier is essentially still a kid out on this battlefield. Of course, he's going to get sidetracked and he's going to be daydreaming about his girlfriend. He's just a kid. It's a very common thing for teenagers and young people to do. It shows that this soldier is just a kid and he can't help himself from acting like one while being thrown into a very adult situation like war. The minimum age requirement for the United States Army is 17 years old, and I have algebra classes with kids that age, and let me tell you, I don't think a single one of them would be prepared for war. Then he got caught, no cover at all. He breathed in her scent, not even a scratch. He didn't die when he stepped on a mine. They were violet and soft. It didn't go off. I think this part can have varying interpretations. Maybe the soldier is actually dead, blissfully unaware, and just floating around happily in the afterlife. Maybe these pantyhose really are some kind of lucky magic charm. But what I actually see it as is every main character in every movie seamlessly comes out of dangerous situations unharmed. And that's what I actually view this part as. This soldier has the love of a movie star, and it lets him waltz through life without harm. The real dangers of war seem unreal and distant from him. Partly because he is so distracted by his emotions, but partly, again, because his young age restricts his ability to completely comprehend the dangers of war. And when her letter came, he didn't cry. He wrapped her pantyhose around his eyes, and he could feel the magic working, keeping him from harm, even though she didn't love him anymore. Can't kill that lucky charm. The first thing I'd like to point out here is the change from the first rendition of this verse, which was he wrapped her pantyhose around his neck, to this verse where he wraps it around his eyes. This shows how he is willingly blinding himself from his own emotional reaction to this breakup. He doesn't cry over it because he finds it easier to just suppress his emotions. This ties back to the idea of being naive because avoiding one's emotions usually comes with younger people who lack the emotional maturity needed for such situations. He's able to disconnect himself from his emotions, which also mirrors his ability to disconnect himself from his actions in war. War is an egregious thing where human lives are taken every day, and this soldier is unable to process this, just like how he's unable to process the loss of his girlfriend. I also believe this person is likely rationalizing keeping his now ex-girlfriend's pantyhose because it brings him this so-called magic luck. It would be weird to carry around an ex's pantyhose for no reason, so he uses its magic abilities as an excuse to keep it. He's not over his girlfriend, so that's why he feels the need to keep the pantyhose. Except he can't admit that to himself, and he's using the quote-unquote magic abilities to rationalize this. I think that viewing it through this lens also explains the earlier part of the song, where the soldier isn't blown up even when walking over mines, and isn't shot even while out in the open. This passage leads me to believe that those other scenes were being viewed retrospectively. The pantyhose's magic abilities are being inserted into those scenes in his memory by the soldier himself, even if that's not how it actually happened. He's, at least on some level, misremembering those incidents to favor the idea that these pantyhose are keeping him safe. Another way to look at this verse is that the soldier is in love more with the idea of his partner than the actual partner as a person. He was never in love with his girlfriend in the first place. Perhaps the pantyhose don't represent his girlfriend as a person he can emotionally connect to, but as a status symbol that represents success. He isn't upset over the loss of his girlfriend because he's still able to use the idea of her to bolster his status among his fellow soldiers and in his own mind. This is an interesting way to interpret the lyrics, but I do think the other idea is better, in my opinion. Blue Hair from the 2018 album Death of a Party Girl. She asked me how to be funny, but that's not something you can teach. This strikes me as an individual trying to change themselves to fit the societal norms they are surrounded with. Many people wish to be naturally funny because it can potentially aid in social interactions. The narrator replies to this girl by saying she can't be taught that. When the narrator replies that this girl can't be taught how to be funny, it makes me think that her attempts to fit in with her peers have been unsuccessful. What seemed so blue in the sunlight by the night was a pale green. This verse uses the nature of dyed hair to explain this woman's feelings towards aging and individuality. Dyed hair, in its essence, is short-lived. It can be fun for the first few weeks or even few months, but inevitably the color fades and needs to be re-dyed. The blue fading to a pale green parallels a once young and spirited girl maturing into a middle-aged woman. The blue hair can not only represent the woman's youth, but also her individuality. So when the bright and spirited blue settles down into a paler color, this indicates the fading of the woman's youth and her individuality. Youth itself is impermanent, exactly like dyed hair. And once that bright blue fades away, all this girl can do is cling to what little color she has left. I also found the diction in this verse to be intriguing. The hair isn't described as just blue in the sunlight, but that it seemed blue. This gives me the impression that the narrator of this song knew, from the very first day they laid eyes on this hair, that it would end up fading away eventually. It's like a parent knowing that their young child likely isn't actually going to be an astronaut when they grow up. No matter how sure or how spirited they are towards spaceships and rocket ships in the moment, they still carry the fate to reject this phase and find a more reasonable career. The hair seemed blue in its exterior, just like that young child, but in reality, at its core, it still carried that fate to fade away to a pale green color. At the time that this blue-haired girl dyed her hair, she may not have known this, and that seems to be the case. And I tried to hold her, but it didn't really last long. This furthers the idea of trying to cling onto one's youth for as long as possible. Trying to hold on to adolescence, no matter how hard one tries, never lasts as long as one would hope. Despite our best efforts, aging is inevitable. She's getting older. I guess she's got to cut her blue hair off. These lines introduce having to, first of all, accept aging, and second of all, having to let go of the phases and characteristics of one's youth. When this girl cuts off her blue hair, this is her finally recognizing that she is no longer the young adult she used to be. She has to let go of this denial by breaking the ties to her past. Dyeing her hair blue was a decision that she made as her younger self, and it's possible that she's been holding on to her hair because she's been trying to hold on to her younger version of herself. It's possible that she's outgrown this hair. People and their worldviews change and adapt as they age, and maybe she's cutting her hair off because she doesn't like the way it looks on her anymore. But another way to look at this is that she doesn't want to cut off her hair and instead feels obligated to do it. Young people are oftentimes encouraged to explore their identities with their fashion choices. Even if it's not outright encouraged, people who look down on more unconventional forms of self-expression can overlook it when it comes to teenagers and young adults because that's what's expected of them. Unfortunately, the same can't really be said for middle-aged adults or older people. It's much more socially acceptable for a 16-year-old to have neon pink hair and a septum piercing than a 6D-year-old. It's possible that this blue-haired girl doesn't actually want to cut her hair, but instead she feels like she has to in order to fit in with her aging companions and abandon these younger friends. I find this argument especially compelling since the wording in this line seems to imply that she has no choice in the matter and that cutting her hair is imperative. And remember, since this blue hair represents youthfulness, this girl feels required to cut off those parts of herself that connect her with her younger self. She asked me if she was pretty. Well, it's clear that the girl's a fraud. Okay, little confession here. Before actually looking at the lyrics, I thought she was being called a frog and not a fraud. And when I saw that, it kind of made me laugh. These lines bring back the idea of trying to fit into the crowd, along with holding on to one's youth. She's a fraud because she's still trying to act like she's a young adult when she's clearly outgrown it. I think these lines also beg the question, why does beauty matter so much? How valuable is being pretty in reality? No matter how stunning someone is as a young adult, we're all going to age, and while older women aren't unattractive by any means whatsoever, they are generally outside of the beauty standard. Women are constantly bombarded with societal pressures to be as physically attractive as possible. This woman now has to grapple with her supposed beauty slipping through her fingers as she ages. And since a woman's ability to fit into the beauty standards is oftentimes equated to her worth, she also feels like her value as a human being is slipping away too. There's really no way of winning if in their eyes, you'll always be a dumb blonde. Being unable to change the way you're perceived by others can be so limiting. It can really trap people in a state of being they're desperately trying to escape. This girl can dye her hair and try to act young, or she can cut it off and try and conform to the societal norms of people her age. Either way, if people still choose to see her as a stereotypical dumb blonde, she's powerless to stop it. This verse also brings back the idea of a woman's worth being tied to her level of physical attractiveness. And she cried over nothing, so there was nothing I could do to stop her from cutting her beautiful blue hair off. A lot of the time, women's emotions are dismissed or minimized because women are stereotypically seen as just emotional or dramatic. When this woman is crying over nothing, she is in fact not crying over nothing. Instead, amounting her emotional turmoil to nothing portrays how societal views are dismissing of her emotions. She also finally cuts off her blue hair, symbolizing her acceptance over her long-gone youth and the end of her individuality to favor societal norms. It looked like cotton candy, just as quick to get licked away. This references the evanescent nature of youth. Something once cheerful and sweet, like cotton candy, disappears so quickly, as if it were licked away. Last I heard, she was living with a boy who acts his age. This woman is now in a relationship with another adult who's abandoned their youthfulness. I'd like to hear if anyone else has different thoughts on this part, because I'm thinking that maybe this brand new relationship is what sparked this woman's transition into her newfound adulthood in the first place. Being with this person made her more willing to accept her own adulthood. Or maybe she's only gone into this new relationship after she's found her own adulthood. Did the chicken or the egg come first? And I guess I'll just miss her. Even though she isn't really gone, things are just different ever since she cut her blue hair off. As people change, things can be just different. I think it can be important to mourn the past versions of yourself or the outgrown things that you used to value. It seems to me like without her blue hair, or without her spark of individuality, this girl just isn't quite the same to the narrator. This can be seen as a negative thing, like she's no longer fun and able to have a good time, but this can also be seen as a positive. She's maturing and settling into a life that, although may seem boring and drab to the narrator, it's comforting to her. There's this quote, I don't know who it's by, but let's be honest, I just saw it on Pinterest and nobody actually gives credit where credit is due on Pinterest, of course not, but this quote that says, it's okay to outgrow people who don't grow. And every time I listen to this verse, it just kind of reminds me of that. The narrator of this song is just as immature as this girl once was. If they really cared about their friend, they would embrace all the changes she's going through. Instead, the line, I'll just miss her, implies he's letting this change break a gap between their friendship and driving this girl away. If that's the case, I see this as a positive thing. This blue-haired girl is letting go of people that were once toxic in her life. But that's just my opinion. This is all speculation, so I really do want to hear your opinions on all of this. Literally all of this. I am obsessed. Also, sorry I only did 2 songs. I feel like I should have done a third, but like writing the script has taken way longer than it should have been. And there are so many other TV girl songs out there I could dissect. If you're interested, Jack Stauber perhaps, let me know. Also, I'm a YouTuber, so I have to say it. Please like and subscribe. It's free and it really does help me out. Either way, thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.